Hello and welcome to Lunch with Leaders. It is brilliant to have you here. I hope that you found us. I hope that you're joining us. As usual, do post in the comments where you're joining from, what you're eating, if you are eating lunch, it's not compulsory. We would love to hear from you. Ruth and Fiona, do you just want to introduce yourselves as people are joining? Ruth, let's go to you first.
Hi everyone, so my name is Ruth Stephens. I run an organisation called Join the Dots, and Join the Dots is primarily formed to help train and equip people in faith organisations to become trauma informed. So my background is I'm an occupational therapist, worked with many children who are fostered and adopted, sensory needs, and I'm an adoptive parent as well.
So you have experience from so many different angles. It's brilliant. Thank you so much for being with us today. And Fiona, what about you?
Thank you. Hi, everyone. My name's Fiona Eve, and I work for a charity called Safe Families. And Safe Families are a charity that know that facing life alone is hard. And when you feel that there's no one there to support you, we recognise that that can be a scary place. And so we offer support, hope and belonging to improve the lives of those in our communities. And we do this by linking children, young people and families with local volunteers who can offer them help and support. We're a Christian charity and we recruit volunteers predominantly, but not exclusively, from church. And we cover nationally, we cover a lot of local authorities. I'm also a parent. I've got 6 children, most of them grown up, and I was a foster carer for 10 years, and I'm an adopter. So my youngest son we had him from birth, he's now 15. And I have the opportunity to, within Safe Families, to be a therapeutic parenting coach, because predominantly I'm a therapeutic parent myself. And I'm also the National Lead for Trauma Informed Support. So we support staff, and we do our best to help the organisation to be as trauma informed as possible.
I think we're just losing you a little bit there, Fiona. I don't know.
Did I kind of?
Okay, I think we'll pause there and just see if your internet picks back up in a minute. But I hope what you heard there is just the absolute wealth and weight of experience that we have in this room, this virtual room. Both Join the Dots and Safe Families are phenomenal. If you haven't come across them before, we'll pop some links. They are really worth checking out and really, really helpful. I'm just going to do a couple of notices as people arrive. I know people are still coming in. If you're joining us, say hi, post in the comments where you're coming from. We'd love to hear from you. Things coming up. We have got a pop-up small group on how to talk to your kids about exams and tests. So that's on the 18th of May. Tell all the families in your church. They can watch at home on their own. They can join in someone's home. They can join you at church, whatever works. But I had a meeting yesterday with Stephen Beamont and Wayne Dixon, who are going to be doing that. And I think it's going to be really worthwhile. We will obviously be talking, it's the season for GCSEs and A-levels, those sorts of things. But we want to be thinking right from a 5-year-old with a spelling test, all about where they're getting their worth from, what that means, how we can support them to connect with God about it. So yeah, just a heads up that that's coming up. The new season of the podcast went live this week. Do check that out if you haven't already. And just to say that the Forge gathering, which is our gathering for children's, youth and family leaders, is fully booked for the South. That's the one coming up in May. But we have still got places on the North gathering, which is in November. Don't worry too much about the South or North thing. We won't be quizzing you. Everyone thinks the divide is somewhere different. So don't worry about that too much. Wonderful. So we are going to, we'll keep going. We're hoping Fiona's internet's going to hold out. But if not, Ruth can tag in and hopefully fill in some of those gaps, which would be great. So we've got a number of questions we want to ask these guys, and I really just want to make the most of the time and make the most of their wisdom and their expertise. If you've got questions you'd like to answer them, please put those in the chat, and we will get to those at the end. We want to answer your questions. Obviously, just be mindful that please don't give any details about any specific families or very specific situations. That wouldn't be appropriate. And feel free to private message us if you prefer, rather than writing in the comments. That's fine. So let's start with you, Ruth. I want to get straight into this and ask you, what behaviours might we see in a church setting, in a church context, that might indicate that there's some attachment or some trauma difficulties going on?
Yeah, so I mean, there's the obvious things, like we might see aggression, and we might see a child that can't settle and sit still. But I think it's really important to also think about how those children that are really withdrawn or basically are very, very compliant. So these kids can be easily missed because of what they've been through. They might have developed strategies that have made them kind of really compliant, so that they look like everything's fine on the surface. And those I find are the most deceiving, and I like to major on those a lot, because we all look at those aggressive behaviours and we all think, oh no, that child is just, I can't just do anything with them, they never comply with anything. And those behaviours are very, very concerning at times and can indicate some trauma or attachment difficulties. But I will say also, we should never also assume it's all trauma, because there's not everything's trauma. I always say that in my training. You can look for trauma around every corner. Saying that, it's, for most people, we need to be more aware of trauma, not less. So yeah, I think other behaviours are being overly attached to one person. If a child has difficulties with attachment in the background, they may overly attach to one person, or they might not attach at all, and they might just struggle with all relationships in your kids' work and your youth group. So yeah, those kind of things really worth looking out for.
Yeah, shall I have a go, and hopefully you can hear me coming in and out. But thanks for that, Ruth. I so agree, and you're so right about it. Not all being about trauma, but however, if it is something like a diagnosis of ASD, or something like a diagnosis of ADHD or anxiety for any reason, actually some of the principles that we can use are the same for both. So there's an element where it's always good to be aware of trauma, as Ruth said, be more aware, not less. But there's principles of empathy and kind of understanding work across the board. And I might add to that, in terms of what you might want to look out for, is hypervigilance. So a lot of children who don't trust adults to keep them safe for whatever reason might be particularly hypervigilant. They might be fussy about where they want to sit. They might particularly want to sit at the back, and they might manage transitions. So transitions from in the church to junior church, or vice versa, or that's change can kind of precipitate some of the challenging behaviours that we might see, either that aggression or the flight bit, so the kind of running away, or trying to get out of a building, or the kind of very mute, kind of very kind of withdrawn kind of behaviour. And on top of that, a lot of our children have got sensory processing difficulties, so they find kind of that environment, an environment where there's lots of people, where there's lots of noise, where there's loud music, where people might come towards them and might hug them, because we want to show love, don't we, in our churches? But actually, for some of our children and adults, that's overwhelming, and those places around input is just too much for them. So there's a fair bit to look out for, I guess.
And I also mentioned shame. I think these kids very often have experienced some pretty awful things, and perhaps especially if they've experienced emotional abuse or neglect, they may feel to blame, or whatever kind of trauma they've been through. The sense of blame can be so big, and that sense of shame and the body language that you're going to see, and just looking out for that sense of shame in their body language is really important. I love what Fiona said about hypervigilance and then sensory needs, because a lot of these kids have had some sort of invasion or lack of sensory input, invasion on their senses due to some sort of abuse, or lack of sensory input due to poor care and neglect. And so their sensory systems are definitely going to be quite skew-if, and they might be scared of tactile input. In your kids' church, you might think it's a great idea to have lots and lots of messy play, and it is, it's lovely, it's great to stimulate the senses, but just look out for those ones that are struggling with that sensory input, because there might be underlying reasons.
That's so helpful. And I think people are going to be thinking already, oh, actually, I can think of, you know, maybe a few families, a few children in my church. I wouldn't necessarily have thought of it like that. I think it's probably true to say in most, if not all of our settings, there will be children and families who've experienced some degree of trauma. And so what can we do to make them feel safe? What are the important things that we can put in place or do to help them with that, do you think?
Shall I go?
Ruth, do you want to go first?
Yeah, so I think one of the most important things is make sure we've got enough helpers. And I know everybody struggles with this, because there's never enough help in church. There's never enough volunteers. And so, yes, that is an important one. But I think the other thing is making sure that, relating to my point about shame, the way we talk to our kids' youth group is definitely not shaming. And very often in churches, we find there's quite a high emphasis on behaviour. So take the brakes off when it comes to behaviour. I'm not saying let anything go, because they need boundaries, and kids really need that sense of safety from boundaries, but it's about trying to have the right kind of communication that will instill a sense of who you are, that they are loved and they are special. And but also I also found in a lot of my work that sometimes you can overdo that as well. If you overdo it, oh, you're amazing, you're wonderful, you can do it. Actually, because they're so filled with shame, they just can't tolerate those compliments. And so that's another thing to be aware of. Yeah, I think there's just a whole load of things we can do. And sometimes it's, the other thing is, I think we mentioned in a session you had in January where myself and Rachel came on, making sure we divide children up, not necessarily by age group, but by developmental ability and developmental stages, because a child who's gone through a lot of trauma, for example, an adopted child, they may be 7 in their chronological age, but in their emotional and kind of their mental age, they may be a lot less than that. So it's looking out for those kind of things. Can we adapt how we do things to make it appeal to their mental and emotional age?
Yeah, I totally agree. And I love how you mentioned safety, because safety is number one. And for those of you who are interested, out a document about trauma-informed principles, and that you could just Google, just put in government trauma-informed principles, and number one is safety. And if our children don't feel safe, they won't be able to engage, they won't be able to listen, they won't be able to do any of the tasks that you put before them. So kind of understanding that they might be coming in with that high level of anxiety, and creating an environment that it makes them feel as safe as possible. So if they want to sit at the back or sit just listening, then allowing them to, not judging them. So the principles of trauma-informed support are safety, trustworthiness, choice, collaboration, empowerment, and cultural considerations. And if you have all of those in the back of your mind when you're delivering whatever it is that you're delivering, whether that be adult-led kind of church services or children, then you can't go far wrong, because understanding what they might what our children are like, and not having that, I guess, kind of that judgment, that criticism when they're not quite fitting in, because a lot of children with very high anxiety avoid demands, and they don't, you have a lovely thing that you spend all Saturday slipping out ready for them to do in junior church, and then they don't want to do it. And it's just kind of not taking that personally and finding different ways to connect and to kind of engage with them.
Yeah, that's brilliant. Sorry, my computer's playing up slightly. Yeah, no, I think that's really helpful. And I think it's interesting what you say about not taking it personally, because it's so easy to make this about us, isn't it? As you say, particularly when you put a lot of time and effort and energy into something. So just bringing that back, different lens. Okay, what might this child have experienced? What's working for them? What's not working for them? What's making them feel safe? Can really change the situation around. And of course, our heart as children's, youth and family leaders is that each of these children connects with God in some way, through our activity and through their families and all those kind of things. But if they've experienced attachment difficulties or trauma, what effect might that have on their perception of God or their relationship with him?
So, yeah, I think because a child who's been through these things has probably been fed what I would term a lot of lies, really, in effect, because we know biblically that God loves us, and we know that God is our Father and that he's a good Father, and we can look at that with our heads, or we can think in our thinking brain, oh yeah, that's true. But even us as adults, some of us have blocks about our beliefs about who God actually is as a father to us. And so these kids are going to have even more blocks, aren't they? And potentially they may feel that the term Father God is just totally alien. And we as good Christians sometimes can just put these things forward, forgetting that children or young people might not be understanding that as a good term. So trying to understand how their brain ticks, and then trying to help them understand that we are there to love them as Jesus did, and hopefully loving them as Jesus did. Okay, that sounds really cliche, doesn't it? But actually it's a huge thing, and as a whole church, we need to watch how we do that, not be punitive helpers in kids' church can be quite difficult for these kids. And star charts, I know I've seen it in churches where there's lots of star charts, and it sounds good and it's lovely, but actually these children will feel highlighted and sort different, and so that will affect their perception of who they are, because God wants us to feel like we are kings and princes and princesses in his kingdom, doesn't he? And these kids will be far from seeing that, and especially if we bring out star charts and things like that.
Yeah, I agree that whole father God, that's really powerful. If a father in your life has been absent or kind of abusive or whatever, and added to that, kind of going back to that thing you said about shame, Ruth, and that deep sense of shame. So they might well feel, God ever loved me? Why? Like they literally almost like rule themselves out, because they've got this deep sense of shame and such low self-esteem and low sense of self-worth. And so I guess for us as church and youth leaders, it's starting at the beginning with that. So the most important thing is kind of connecting with them and really trying to bring out that kind of, you've got a good heart, and kind of building them up, whatever that looks like. And it might not look like in the beginning, kind of making sure they understand all the kind of nuances and understanding of our Christian faith. It's about starting from at the beginning and engaging with them and connecting with them, showing them that you are trustworthy, that you will do what you say, that you are safe, and kind of and engaging with them on that level. Because actually for a lot of children, especially that hypervigilance, and they're not really thinking about, they might be thinking about where's the food and when are we going to have snack, but they're probably also thinking that they're watching the room. You know, my son's 15 and we had a conversation recently where I realized that he was spending the whole of the church service watching out, and he verbalized that he thought somebody would come up behind him and get him. And I said, do you think I would take you to a place where that might happen? And he said, oh, I'm like that everywhere. And so he, you know, we've had him 15 years. He came to us from birth, but he's hyper vigilant because of, you know, he's very anxious. And so being aware that that's when that child is playing up, that might be what's happening. So kind of understanding what's the feeling behind the behavior, and kind of understanding that's going to impact their faith, and starting at the beginning, really. You know, my son, we always sit at the back, and if there's no space, we stand at the back, because then he doesn't have to worry about who's behind him. And so if a child comes into junior church, kind of allowing that to happen and recognizing that the first point of call is kind of just to create.
I just add another little point. People on this call may have heard of the psychology of projection, and that's very, very pertinent here, because very often kids project something onto us, or we might have baggage as helpers that is worth looking at, because sometimes a child will trigger you, and I think it's helpful to ask the question, why do they trigger me so much? And then another really helpful question is, who do they remind me of? And there might be someone in our own past, and then in their past, in that child, they might have someone in their past that you remind them of. And so I found this in my work in schools, for example, that sometimes a particular teacher or teaching assistant just does not work for one particular child. And it's worth just thinking, maybe they remind the child of someone that has cared for them or not cared for them properly in the past. So yeah, triggers are really worth thinking about. Who does they remind me of?
Sure. And conveying that sense of what's happened matters. So, you know, any of their experiences, it matters to you, and then it obviously eventually they'll understand that it matters to God, and that it wasn't okay, some of the trauma that they may have been through.
I think it's so interesting that it's come back to that again, that actually we're thinking about these children and young people who are in our care, but a lot of this has to do with us and the way we think about ourselves or our experiences of our past. I think you're that's so helpful to highlight that. Thank you.
Thank you.
And what about when we do feel out of our depth? What about with those families where you think, actually, this is beyond what I can easily handle on my own, or I think they could do with some more some professional help and some support and some advice? At what point do we offer that, and what's the best way to do that? Ruth, do you want to go first again?
I've got pretty good internet here. Yeah, I think it's acknowledging to ourselves where our own limitations lie. And we're not all therapists. Very few people in churches are therapists, and even if they are, it's their day job, not their church volunteer job. So but you could draw on the expertise of some people in your church that have got those skill sets, and it's worth doing that. Obviously, we've got to think about confidentiality and making sure we don't breach that. So yeah, reaching our own capacity, recognizing where our limits are, and saying, actually, I think this child really does need some more in-depth professional help. Don't be afraid to admit that, because, you know, we're not here to be therapists to our kids in church. And maybe it's really important as church, young people's youth leaders, children's workers, to understand the local authorities around us, knowing where to go for help. And I know there's that sense that there isn't enough help, and there isn't. But just being aware of where to go, your local front door or MASH team, whatever it's called in your area, locating that and knowing that perhaps you might need to talk to your safeguarding lead. And also, I think the other thing is, we do need to include the parents, get to know the whole family, make sure you get to know the whole picture, because what you see in children's church might be completely different to what they see at home, and they might be shocked to see and hear what you're experiencing. But also, if that family do need to be approached, don't be afraid of approaching them, and just talking to them as friends, saying, you know, what can I do to help this child, first of all, and then secondly, if you really feel that you still can't offer what's needed and that they need more professional help. Very often families get very upset when you mention safeguarding team to refer them to, but in most areas the front door to some support will be through a safeguarding team or equivalent. It's often called the front door, isn't it? I think Fiona may know more. And so you go to that service, and families might feel panicked about it, but those services really are on board with trying to help the person first. They're not going to whip the child away. And I think a lot of churches have that perception that if you contact what is equivalent of safeguarding team, they're going to whip the child away. It's not the case. I mean, that may happen, and we have to be prepared for that. But I think it's just recognising that those teams are there to support the family.
Yeah, I haven't got loads to add. You've so eloquently said that, Ruth. I only need to backtrack. So if it's just that a child's being very disruptive, and you're not coping, but they perhaps don't need the professional help. But I think we need to try and get the rest of the church on board in terms of finding more people to come into their into the church, to kind of draw alongside that family, to draw alongside the children, and to kind of give them some space to do what they need to do. So if that is taking mum and the child out for a coffee instead of going into junior church or going into the main church service, then do that, and be creative in your thinking as to how you can families when they're not quite fitting into what we'd like them to do. So that's all I would like to add, and also to remember that in terms of down the professional route, families can be supported and encouraged to go via the GP to see what they can access in terms of diagnosis and assessments and things, if there's some behaviours that might need more investigation.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's really helpful, thank you. Our time is nearly up. It has flown as I thought it would. If you've got any questions for Fiona and Ruth, if you can type in the comments now, that would be really helpful. If it's something where you don't want to be identified, obviously be aware this recording is publicly available. Feel free to just drop us a private message, that's fine. And if you can keep the details vague, that would be really helpful for us. But just while we do that and see if there are any questions that come in, you both suggested all sorts of excellent places that we can get more support and more resources. I think probably a lot of us watching this and listening to it will think, wow, this is super important and I really need to get better equipped, or someone in my church does. Can you just signpost us to a few different places that can help us with that?
Fiona, do you want to?
You're both being shy. I'll promote your own things if you do. You're supposed to say your own things. It's okay.
Well, I'm definitely promote Ruth's things, because she does run a website that's fantastic and covers a lot of these things, doesn't it, Ruth? In terms of, I'm sure you'll say a bit more, but I would always promote Ruth's website and training, and one of which is coming up soon. If you want to know more about trauma, Safe Families run a trauma support training that everybody can access, and we welcome and encourage church leaders and youth and family leaders to come on. There's going to be a link, I think, that will be sent out. It's a 2-hour session covering kind of what is trauma, how it affects children and development, and looking at some strategies for how we can support them best. There's also a movement called Renew, which some of you may have heard of. So that was for adults, who were struggling with that, some of that sensory kind of processing stuff. So particularly for people to support their emotional well-being, and their line is where it's okay to not be okay. But they also have now a children and youth section, and some churches around the country, and we want more and more of them to be getting some of those up and running, where they're able to run some groups specifically for children and young people, where they are able to kind of prioritize their emotional well-being. And it's a quiet space, so it's not, you know, it's recognizing some of those sensory processing difficulties. Ruth, I'll hand over to you.
Fiona has written some very nice books as well with Ray Morphin, haven't you? Maybe they should be promoted, because they're really good for, actually they're good for parents really, aren't they? But any help you, any supportive adult around the child. Yeah, they're called Let's Think About Trauma, and you can access them via the TLG Resources website. And then on Friday, Join the Dots are running a webinar about adverse childhood experiences and how we can adapt our church and young people's work, children's and young people's work, to help these kids and support these kids. We also do offer bespoke training to various groups and churches whenever requested. So yeah, worth looking at our website to find out more.
Brilliant. Thank you both so much. We're popping those links on Facebook now, and also this video will get written up. It'll be put on our website with links to those things too. So if you've missed that, don't worry, you have another opportunity. And do feel free to get in contact with us if you missed something and you'd like to do that more, because we'd really want to make sure we facilitate that. And we are so grateful for both of you for what you do with your families, what you do in your professional lives, and particularly for coming and joining us and speaking to us today. So thank you so, so much. I don't think we have any questions. Oh, no, we do. This always happens when I think we haven't got any. Any tips for supporting parents who have also experienced trauma as they seek to support their children within a church context? We touched on this a little bit, but could you maybe go into that in a bit more depth?
Shall I start with this one?
Yeah, your internet's fine at the moment. Go for it.
You're doing okay. Good, great. Yeah, I mean, the principles are the same actually, and it's kind of, again, addressing the situation without judgment or criticism, because in that case the parents, they may well be highly anxious themselves and easily triggered. And Ruth touched a little bit on triggers, and we talk about trauma triggers and things that kind of can create high levels of anxiety that you and I might see as quite normal, might be something that can really be a trigger for a parent or child. And so it's kind of being aware of your environment and seeing if there's anything in the environment that might be a trigger, and having that in the back of your mind. Being trauma aware does not mean we need to know the trauma to know how to support people trauma digging, but we can be aware and kind of acknowledge that some people might be coming in with high levels of anxiety. They may well have experienced trauma. They may have experienced trauma in church, and therefore church itself is a trauma trigger. So using huge amounts of empathy, lots of acceptance, lots of kind of space, giving people space, not ever assuming that people will want or kind of like overly kind of effusive welcome, because sometimes it's a bit like that praise that Ruth talked about. Sometimes that kind of is a trigger in itself for people. So just being gentle, using kind of sensitive language, and supporting parents where they need it, in terms of if they can't be in the service but they can have a coffee, sacrificing your time in that service to go and be with them. Things to add to that.
Love it. Also, just thinking about how sometimes churches can over spiritualize these problems, and for example, thinking about maybe something demonic, and trauma can look like that, but actually there's some weird things that trauma can do to people. And I don't doubt that, you know, we in our faith, we believe in the spiritual forces of darkness that can get on and hold these things and make it worse. But I think just accepting that there are times where trauma can do such a lot to someone, and it can look rather odd, and you may need to get professional help, and finding someone in your area that is suitable, that really does have experience in trauma. Don't just think, oh, I'll get them to the local prayer ministry in town. Make sure you really do find someone who is experienced in trauma therapeutic work. And it might be going through the GP, it might not, I don't know. Obviously depends on funds as well.
Yeah.
Such a good point, and so specific to our faith context. You know, some of this, there's a lot of good trauma-informed training out there, but it's probably not going to mention things like that, which can be really big issues and things to be aware of. And just, yeah, I love that. Lots of empathy and not labeling, not jumping in with stuff. We are going to wrap up now, I think. So if you would like to join us, if you would like to talk about this a little bit more, but in a more private forum, the link is there available now. You're welcome to come and join us on Zoom. We're going to stop live streaming, so you can ask whatever you want and chat about what this looks like in your context, knowing it's not being broadcast to the world. But thank you so much for joining us. We will be back again in May. And yeah, as usual, follow us on social media or our emails and things if you'd like to stay in touch and find out what's happening next. And do make the most of these ladies' organisations and those links, and let us know if we can help you in any other way. So thank you so much, Ruth and Fiona.